Thank you, Jeremy. All right. Would you take a moment and pray with me, please? Gracious God, thank you so much for the reminders that you have been constant in the life of the peoples of this world from beginning until an end that only you see. I pray that as we take time today to think about the blessings we have and the blessings we have to give, that you would guide and direct my words and that nothing I say will be against your will. Thank you for the privilege of standing in this place. In Jesus' name, amen. So, Abram, whom we know as Abraham, because his name gets changed along the way, was a man who made a lot of moves, lots of steps by faith. And he started out, and when he originally left Ur of the Chaldees, he left with family, and as time went along, each new move ended up being a move that took more faith because he was doing more and more of these things, either by himself or as the leader of the peoples that were moving. The story itself comes in an interesting place in the book of Genesis because the most important thing before this move of Abraham's is the Tower of Babel and then a bunch of genealogies that follow that. But this is the first major work of faith after the tower. And so it puts it in a very significant place. And the text that we are using for our stewardship this year is found here, and it says, I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Abraham was blessed by God, but many of the blessings that he was promised were blessings that did not come to him. They came to his children to the nth generation. And some of those blessings are still not completely fulfilled. Yet Abraham was willing to trust God in faith, to go to an unknown place, to live with unknown people, to experience blessings in an unknown fashion, and to do it in a way that served the God who called him. Now, Abraham wasn't perfect, and you all know stories of Abraham where Abraham did things that he really ought not to have done. It didn't change the fact that Abraham's faith was such that he was able to claim for himself and for his offspring the blessings that God had promised. And those blessings become a good lens to look at our own blessings. We cannot claim Abraham's blessings as our own. First of all, the land of Canaan already has plenty of folks making claim on it. We're not going to be claiming any land of Canaan just because we think of ourselves as being in the line of Abraham. But the whole understanding of how blessings are promised and how blessings are given continues. And one of the great lessons of the text that was just read is that blessings are not given for the sole good of the one receiving the blessing. And that principle goes throughout the Old as well as the New Testament. And if you look at 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, you find the same principle articulated in a slightly different way. It says, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. God's blessings come not so that we can somehow be better or greater than those around us, but God's blessings are for the good of the entire nation, group, church, whatever it is that we're talking about. We are talking about blessings and how we are to manage or deal with those blessings. So you get my rider, my sort of, this is a stewardship sermon. I hate giving stewardship sermons because usually people hear that word and they block their ears and say, you don't have any business telling me what to think about my money. All that said, you're right. The pastor of the church is the main beneficiary of whatever it is that's in the budget. Right? This year's budget, about $106,000. $36,000 of that goes directly to me in one kind of compensation or another. Full disclosure, right? You know what it is that I get. I've got with me a copy of the last financial statement, and if anybody wants to see it, you're welcome to see it. The choice or decision that this congregation made is that in order to be faithful to what God has called you to be and to do, and I always say called you to be before do, because you must first be in the presence of God. You must first be a person or group that's willing to be led by the Spirit before you can do anything that is in keeping with the will of God, if that's what you were trying to do. So you be before you do. But the decision was made that for this congregation to continue being and doing as God has called, you needed a pastor. And so somehow or another, your pastor has to put food on the table and a roof over her head. That's what the budget does. Done with that part of it. I can tell you, if you should choose not to hire a pastor, you could get by with less than $8,000 a year for pulpit supply and get good sermons from folks that know what they're doing. And you could continue the life of this congregation very much the way it is today. You don't need me standing here to do what you're already doing. You don't need any pastor standing here to continue doing what you're already doing. You have a congregation full of very gifted people. You have been blessed beyond measure with giftedness. Just take a look around you at the things that people are able to do in the ways they serve. If you are called to do more than you are doing now, you probably need someone to offer leadership and to begin bringing the very disconnected parts of this congregation together. The different organizations within this church, each functions beautifully, but you function very independently of one another. And in that function, the jobs get done, but the life of the church is very fragmented. You can continue to do that. I suspect you could probably, without ever raising your budget at all and without calling a pastor, you could survive in this place another 20 or 30 years. You don't really need to do anything if you are comfortable in the place that you are. If you are hearing God's call to go to someplace new, to your land of Canaan, if you are feeling called that the community around your church is just as important to God as the neighborhood was when you all lived closer to this church, you're going to have to make some decisions about how to go forward. Susan and the search committee have done a great job of asking you what it is that you would like to see this church be and do as you go forward. Church growth is not a God vision. Just growing a church in number is never God's way of doing things. God calls us to grow closer to God and to one another in faith. God calls us to be the church in the world. God calls us to love our neighbors as ourselves. That may bring more people into your pews, it may not, but it will make a difference in your world. The church was never designed to be an entity of and for itself. The church was designed to be a way for God to bless the world. God blesses us that we might go and be blessings. Churches were never meant to look inward. They were meant to look outward. We are blessed, and and you were asked with your pledge cards to think about your blessings and how those blessings could be shared. We as a congregation can learn from Abraham and from the journey that Abraham took. He left a comfortable place to go to the unknown, but he did it knowing that God went with him. And if this congregation chooses to begin an outward look, to begin reaching into our neighborhood, you're going into unknown territory, you're going scary places, and you're going to run into things that you don't know how to deal, and you're going to find that those things stretch you sometimes beyond the place of comfort. But it will give you a chance to grow in faith and in community with one another and the people around you. Abraham ended up at the end of today's text in the Negev, which is mostly desert, but it's a place where at least part of the year there's good grazing for sheep, which is what Abraham had, was sheep. On the edge of the Negev is a body of water called the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is dead because it has 34% salt. Its salinity runs at 34%. Only one body of water in the whole world is saltier, and it's only got about half a percentage higher salinity. It's a dead sea because of all of that salt. And the reason it has all of that salt is that water flows into the Dead Sea, but it doesn't flow out. The Jordan River comes down from the Sea of Galilee, and it spills into the Dead Sea, and there the water remains because the Dead Sea is the lowest point on land in the entire world. There's no place for it to go down to. It's stuck. And it evaporates, and more and more and more salts and minerals get into the water. I mean, you can sit up on this water. It's so dense. But I think that picture of the Dead Sea is a good picture of what happens when anybody, whether it's a body of water or a body of people, continually takes something in without giving something out. So, as we begin to think about what we want to do with the blessings God's given us, with what kind of budget we want to see, with what kind of decisions we can make with the budget that comes from your offerings of the pledges, then you can begin to understand what exactly it is that you want. Because you can choose to follow God into the unknown, trying something new, something different, trying to be church in the world, or not. God never forces us to follow any call, ever. We get to choose. But I think this budget and the ones in the next couple of years are going to be your put up or shut up time. You can say, yes, we want to grow, we want to outreach, we want to do all these things. But it's up to you to prove what you want to do by what you do. And that becomes a way of measuring, okay, how much of a jump off a second-story roof person am I? How much does my faith truly cause me to act as if God is all people around us say God is? What do we truly believe about the God who has called us to be in this place and in this church? You can continue to be exactly as you are without ever making a change. And you will be able to continue to do what you've always done, no matter what happens with your offerings and your pledges. But your pledges are your opportunity to express your faith in a vision that's bigger than what you now are. The choice is up to each person in the pews, each person who contributes to what's going on. Now, whatever you choose to do doesn't change what may or may not happen with me as your pastor. That decision is being made somewhat independently because I'm looking for God's call on my life. And your decision and God's call to me may not really have anything to do with one another. But if you want a pastor, you need to figure out how badly you want that pastor and what you want that pastor to be and to do in your midst. This community needs this congregation to be faithful. The children that have been coming to Wednesday night and here on Sunday mornings, those children need you to be faithful. So my prayer has been for some time now that you will each pay attention to what God is calling you as an individual to do or as a family, and to be faithful